has some crazy themes in it. There's some real deep themes, but is a lot of fun. Check out 1991's Body Parts.
Probably be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Especially once you see Brad Dourif show up, you're like, okay, this can't be bad. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Frightfully Forgotten Horror Movies. But before we get started, what are we drinking today?
The Nostromo's Contraband.
Black IPA?
Yep.
Today we have a fan request. Stanley Surik would like us to do 1991's Body Parts. Cover Body Parts, not do Body Parts.
Yeah, I could be misconstrued there.
This movie is directed by Eric Red, not to be confused with Eric the Red.
The Viking.
He's not only notable as a director, but also a writer. He wrote a couple of great movies. He wrote Near Dark, which we covered a long time ago. He wrote the cult classic The Hitcher. Mm-hmm. And he also directed and wrote the werewolf movie Bad Moon.
Jeff Fahey is in this, and we all know him from Psycho 3, the famous...
The lamps?
Where he's all serious.
The lamp scene, whatever that means, naked with those lamps. That's how you get the ladies, I guess.
Yeah, you gotta cover up your junk with lamps. He was also in Lawnmower Man too, just to name a couple movies. Brad Dourif is in this, and we all know him as Chucky, of course. He was also in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of our favorite movies.
Billy Bibbit?
Yeah, and he was in Exorcist 3, which we did. And he was also in Graveyard Shift, which we also covered, too.
He's in tons of shit. He's a fucking national treasure, that guy. Oh my god.
Zakes Moquet is in this, but he was in Serpent in the Rainbow.
I want to hear you scream.
Not good enough.
Oh, traumatizing. Body Parts starts off with our main character here, Bill, played by Jeff Fahey. He's like a psychologist and he's interviewing inmates in prison. He goes home that night and he's laying in bed with his wife and he's talking to her and he's pretty much doubting the effectiveness of his work. Like, these guys aren't going to change? Like, what am I doing here?
If I prove that they have a conscience, they'll fry for it.
Yeah. So there's already self-doubt in him right from the get-go. And he's driving to work the next day. In front of him on the highway, he sees this car with a tire that's kind of like on the verge of coming off. It's all wobbly, and you're just kind of waiting. Like, the tension is really good in that scene.
Yeah.
He's like, when's it gonna come off? And finally it flies off, and he gets in this big, like, pile-up, basically, and he gets rear-ended from behind, goes flying through the windshield. The doctor's talking to his wife and saying, well, he's gonna lose his arm. It's not salvageable, basically. But we're starting this new experimental transplant surgery where we can take a donor arm and graft it on, basically, without even talking to her husband on his behalf.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Signs of papers. And he gets wheeled into this operating room. There's all these surgeons with these fucking guns and everything, these rifles. Like, what's going on? And they start cutting up this other guy.
The saws are all his blood.
And Bill wakes up. He's got this arm that's been grafted on. And they cut off all the bandages and it looks all gnarly. He starts his recovery. He's lifting these weights and trying to get some muscle back, and he's actually able to kind of move the arm a bit, and then like involuntarily does all this stuff, right? He leaves the hospital and he's greeted by just a sea of reporters wanting to talk to him about the success of this new transplant. You know, it's groundbreaking. It's going to change the world. He starts having these visions of like murders and everything. His arm is doing things that he doesn't want it to do. Like he's shaving and then he cuts his face like
God damn!
Intentionally, right?
Yeah.
He's also a teacher and he's lecturing the students and he's talking about basically the paradox of violence. So when is it good? When is it bad? When is it acceptable? You know?
Yeah. And where does it reside in the body?
Yeah.
Is it the soul or the flesh?
Which all has to play into this transplant surgery he had done. He's interviewing that same inmate at prison, knows about the transplant, it's all over the news, right? And says, I can't help but notice the tattoo on your new hand there.
Yeah.
You know, that's a tattoo given to inmates on death row.
Yeah, and it actually scares the shit out of the convict.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want anything to do with you anymore.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
He wants to know where the hell this arm came from. So he goes to the police and gives him a thumbprint off the new arm.
Yeah.
The arm was from a serial killer named Charlie Fletcher, who was put on death row and then had his body parts donated to science.
And he had a fucking rap sheet a mile long, too.
Yeah.
He was a mean dude.
Play fighting with this kid one day, and it gets a little rough, and he like backhands this kid, just fucking smacks him one. And this kid is actually played by a Canadian actor who I recognized from Kung Fu: The Legend Continues and Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah.
You guys probably recognize him as being one of the kids around the campfire that tells a story. Sleeping with his wife, and he starts choking her. Well, he's sleeping too, you know? So his wife is like, fuck this, boots him out of the house.
He's scared about what he might do, so he goes back to the doctor to get more answers. Doesn't want this arm anymore. He's like, take the arm back. I don't want it anymore. I'm not taking the arm back. You're stuck with it. You gotta live with it.
It's a marvel of science here.
Yeah.
You know?
She's kind of protecting her own ass, too, because she's like this famous doctor now and everything. But while he's at the doctor's office, he notices the names of the person who got the other arm, and there's a person who got both his legs.
They really cut that son of a bitch up, eh?
The person who got the arm, which is Brad Dourif's character, Remo. He has these enormous paintings in like this huge loft. He tells him, I used to do shitty paintings before. Nobody was interested in my work. And now look at what I'm painting. And it's like these visions of like murder and death and like
macabre things.
He also tracks down the guy who got the legs, and he actually pulls up behind him in traffic. The legs actually involuntarily floor it right through a red light, and he's all trying to weave in and out of traffic, and finally slams the brakes on, and Bill comes up behind him. Basically, he doesn't want anything to do with Bill either. He's happy that he got the legs. He's like, well, these legs are better than no legs, you know? So Bill gets everybody together at the bar, sharing stories about
limbs?
You know, yeah. This guy beside them, come on, show me the arm. He's like, no, I'm not a circus act, buddy. He's like, come on. He punches him and he gets into this huge fucking brawl.
Bust that bottle over his head.
And like, there's all these guys that are coming with pool cues, and he all smashes the guy's head into the bar. You hear all this crunching. And
his arm's all super strong.
Mark, the guy who got the legs, he goes home. His legs start acting up on. He phones Bill. Bill can hear on the other end that somebody has broken into his apartment to attack Mark. So Bill rushes over. He finds Mark on the bed, blood everywhere, and he's missing his legs now. Which is weird.
They would walk off on their own or what?
Yeah. So we then see Remo. Somebody breaks into his loft and throws him out the window, but rips his arm off, and he ends up falling onto the cop car as it's pulling up with Bill inside.
Some super dummy.
The arm comes off all easy.
Yeah, just like nothing.
So by now, Bill
knows that he's next too on the hit
list.
list.
Yeah. He's in a cop car, and they come up to a red light, and Bill's got his hand out the window. And there's this weird car that pulls up beside them. There's a handcuff that goes click onto his arm. And that's where we're gonna end it.
And they drive off.
Yeah.
Hey!
So if you want to keep watching Body Parts, see what happens with poor Bill there and his arm.
That crazy scene where they drive off and they're handcuffed is crazy.
Yeah.
So the first thing I got to mention about Body Parts is it's actually at surface level pretty simple, but it's really chocked full of all sorts of themes. Evil, and what makes someone a killer. Mystery too, because you're not really sure if it's the arm that's making him do these things or if that's already inherent in him.
Yeah.
And he, just knowing that he's got the arm of a killer, lets that part of him
out
basically. Right.
Yeah. So is it in the flesh, which means from the killer gets grafted onto you so you become a killer? Or is it in the soul, which means that it was always in him? The effects for this movie are actually pretty damn good, you know? There's a lot of blood. The kills are really good.
When the guy's got no legs, like, it looks really good. It's obvious that they're in the bed, you know, but still, like, it's classic, but it looks great. He stumbles upon the laboratory and sees all those body parts, like, moving in that glass case.
Yeah.
Looks really good.
Yeah, they're attached to those cords.
There's not tons of kills in this movie, but the kills that are there are really good. Like, Brad Dourif's death is great. And he all sounds like Chuck.
Yeah. You can't separate that.
It's hard to separate that, especially when he's yelling.
Yeah.
I just picture Chucky falling.
And the kills are all relevant to the movie as well. There's no real indiscriminate killing.
And the acting is really good in this movie, you know, because it's a pretty silly premise, really. So you need good, solid, really grounded acting to keep you invested in the silly story.
Right,
You know? And because it's played serious, and the acting is good enough to get it all across, it's believable.
And it's also not an overly flashy or overproduced looking movie, right? It keeps that serious tone. So it all helps to ground it and sort of make this crazy story believable.
Exactly, yeah.
You know,
like,
relatable.
Yeah, because all the characters are so just normal people who are down-to-earth people, you know?
Yeah, and like Jeff Fahey there, he's a doctor, but he's not driving some Porsche or anything. He's just driving some beater sedan, you know, and shit. So you can feel for these characters.
And this movie is really good at throwing you curveballs. Like, you think it's gonna go one way, and then, oh, no, they swerve you, and you're like, shit, oh, man, you got me there.
Yeah, the handcuff is like a huge curveball.
That's the big one, the handcuff, and then you see who cuffed the hand, and it's this guy who you assume at this point is the killer, Charlie Fletcher. He's got this like brace on, and his head was like put on a different body, and like, what the fuck? Like, huge curveball.
Yeah.
And he's still out there, like, holy shit.
Yeah. There's that scene too where he's gets into that accident, and then he's all carrying all those limbs, like, and they're all rubber.
And it's paced really great, you know, so you're always intrigued, and, you know, like, the curveballs keep you intrigued. The one thing I'll have to mention about this movie that I did not like, and I was kind of like, what? Is kind of the ending and, like, the motives behind all these happening. So, big spoiler here, we find out that the doctor who did the actual transplant surgery is like kind of behind all this.
Yeah.
And she's planning on getting like all the limbs back to, I guess, put this killer back together again. Like, she's helping him get all of his body parts back again.
Yeah.
But you don't know why. Like, what's the purpose? Like, how, like, you're all about benefiting society and making this big leap in science, only to undo it and put this guy to get, like, you don't know why. Like, why is she in cahoots with this guy? And why did she keep his head and put it on a different body and keep him alive? Like, I don't know. Like, they don't explain that.
That's right, yeah. And it's a little too late in the movie when it does that flip, too, right? Yeah. So it's totally out of left field. So you kind of have to make things up on your own as to why.
A couple of lines of dialogue saying, this is why. You know?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm his sister, really, or whatever. Like, the only way we can save him was to break him apart and put him back together again, right?
Yeah.
But they don't do that. It's just like, why? Wrapped up nicely, it would be like the villain explaining their scheme, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's all you needed, and it would have been fine.
Yeah.
But they don't do that.
So just kind of like, they're doing it because they can.
Yeah, like,
so it doesn't really make much sense.
But besides that, it's still a super fun movie, you know? It's really fun.
Yeah, it's tons of fun. Yeah, I really had a good time watching it.
Face value, it's a silly horror movie about a guy that gets an arm put on him. But really, it has a lot to say about a lot of things. About like the human condition, self-doubt, you know, what makes people do these evil things. And, you know, that's inherent in, you know, everyone. What brings it out, you know?
Exactly.
In the case of Bill, well, is the arm making him do bad things, or is he just letting things go in his brain and letting it come out himself? He was always like that.
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
but he hid it.
Yeah.
It's interesting stuff because the other two guys didn't do anything bad. You know, the guy with the legs and then Brad Dourif, they weren't harming people or anything, but he was. So why him?
Yeah,
You
and
know?
they do sort of mention that to him as well. It's like when they're trying to brush him off, it's like, well, we're not having any problems, so bugger off. Like, we're having a good life now.
Yeah. A weird take on like the Frankenstein theme, like you said, but instead of like putting a body together,
They're taking it apart. Yeah.
and farming it out. It's kind of neat. They're like farming out evil, you know?
Yeah.
You take this, and this person gets this, and
Yeah.
and the one monster can turn into multiple monsters.
Yeah, it's
now.
kind of neat, you know. It's a neat little twist on the Frankenstein theme, kind of. So if you want a fun movie that's pretty down to earth, has some crazy themes in it, some real deep themes, but is a lot of fun, then check out 1991's Body Parts.
Probably be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Especially once you see Brad Dourif show up, you're like, okay, this can't be bad.
And until next time, keep drinking.